Thursday began like any other day at the Interstellar Academy. The long metal corridors hummed with the soft vibration of engines. Lights glowed gently against the silver walls, and the voices of hundreds of cadets echoed as they moved between classes. Species from across the galaxy filled the academy, each with their own strange shapes, colors, and languages. Some floated, some crawled, some glided, and among all of them, humans were still few. Daniel walked quietly through the crowd, holding his books close. He was used to the looks curious, sometimes amused, sometimes dismissive. Humans had only joined the galactic stage a few decades ago. To the older races, they were still considered children, reckless, and untested. But Daniel did not mind. He had learned to carry himself with quiet strength. Beside him walked Lyra, her crystalline body shimmering faintly under the academy lights. She came from the race known as the Ilari beings, who looked like living glass. Their bodies caught the light and bent it into colors that danced with every movement. Too many cadets, she looked like a work of art walking through the halls. To Daniel, she was simply Lyra, his closest friend. For weeks, she had carried a secret in her heart, something she could not say out loud, something that kept her restless at night. Her people were strict. Every bond was arranged by the council. Every vow had to be approved. Love was not given freely. It was controlled, measured, and judged. Yet here she was, walking beside a human, laughing at his clumsy jokes, feeling her heart grow heavier with words unspoken. That morning, Daniel had dropped one of his books. As he bent down to pick it up, he looked up at her with that same warm smile he always had. No judgment, no fear, just kindness. It was the simplest thing in the universe, and yet it was what made him different. Her chest tightened. The decision rose inside her like a wave she could not stop. Before she could doubt herself, before she could let fear win again. She leaned forward, her crystalline lips touched his. It was brief, soft, almost uncertain, but it was real. The hall fell silent. Conversations stopped. Footsteps froze. Every alien eye in that corridor turned toward them. For a heartbeat, the entire academy seemed to hold its breath. Daniel blinked, surprised. His cheeks flushed red. But instead of pulling away in fear or shame, he smiled gently. He leaned close and whispered, "Thank you." That was all, just 2 words. But they carried something stronger than any law. For Lyra's people, a kiss was not small. It was not casual. It was a vow, a promise of loyalty that could not be broken. To give such a bond to a human race seen as reckless and short-lived was unthinkable. Her people would call it a betrayal. They would demand answers. But in that moment, she did not care. Her heart was racing, her body glowing faintly, with colors she could not control. She had finally done what she had feared for so long. She had chosen. The whispers began almost instantly. "Did you see that?" She kissed him. A vow to a human. Some voices were shocked, others disgusted, and a few whispered with curiosity. The news spread like fire. Within minutes, the entire academy would know. By nightfall, her people's council would hear of it. Lyra's hands trembled, but Daniel took one gently and held it. His touch was warm, grounding, steady. He looked at her, not with fear or doubt, but with quiet courage. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." And somehow, she believed him. It was only Thursday, just another day, at the academy. Yet with that simple kiss, everything had changed. A bond had been forged that would ripple far beyond the two of them. Neither of them could see it yet, but history had just shifted. A galaxy that had always believed in order and control had been given its first spark of rebellion. And it had come, not from war, not from politics, but from something far smaller and far greater, a kiss. By Friday morning, the entire academy was buzzing. The kiss between Lyra and Daniel had spread faster than fire in dry grass. Whispers followed them down every corridor, floated across classrooms, and even slipped into the laboratories. Cadets stopped mid-step, their heads turning as the story reached them. "Did you hear?" One avian cadet whispered, feathers ruffling nervously. "The crystal girl, she kissed a human." "Impossible," a reptilian student hissed. "It shouldn't happen. That's forbidden." The hallways were filled with murmurs of disbelief, curiosity, and even admiration. For many humans were still strange, small, and reckless. Their culture was unpredictable, their emotions untamed. Yet somehow, Daniel had stood beside Lyra, not with shame or fear, but with calm certainty. That was the part that puzzled everyone the most. Lyra walked through the crowd, her crystalline body glinting in the early morning light. She felt exposed, as if every gaze weighed down on her. Her heart pounded with excitement, fear, and something else she couldn't name. She had chosen freely, and yet she knew the price for that choice could be high. Daniel's hand found hers. He squeezed it gently, a silent promise. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, and she believed him. The whispers were not just idle gossip. They carried questions, doubts, and new ideas. Cadets who had never thought about choice before were suddenly thinking about it. "If a crystal can choose a human, why can't I choose who I bond with?" murmured a young insectoid cadet to her friend. "What if love doesn't need a council's permission?" A floating being wondered aloud. By mid-morning, the whispers had turned into conversations, and the conversations became debates. The Academy's rigid structured rules, its traditions, its councils suddenly felt fragile. Daniel and Lyra were no longer just two cadets. They were a spark, and sparks had a way of igniting fires. Lyra could feel it. Every glance, every whisper, every quiet murmur seemed to carry weight. The weight of expectation, the weight of change. Some cadets stared openly, their expressions a mix of awe and envy. Others averted their eyes, afraid of the consequences. But all of them were thinking the same thing. Humanity was different. Humans were not bound by centuries of tradition. Humans dared to choose. Humans defied rules simply by existing. And Daniel was the clearest example. He had not just accepted her choice, he had embraced it, protected it, defended it. In a galaxy where loyalty was often demanded rather than given, where promises could be broken under pressure, Daniel's steadfastness was something rare, almost unimaginable. By late morning, the whispers had reached the ears of the faculty. Instructors from all races were murmuring in hushed tones. "The human cadet. He stands with her," one teacher said. This could change things." Meanwhile, the Council of Lyra's people had already begun to stir. They were deliberate, calculating, and unyielding. For them, such an act was a violation, a rebellion disguised as affection. Orders would be given, punishments considered, and explanations demanded. But even they could not yet see the ripple that had begun to spread. Because it was not just Lyra and Daniel who had been changed. Something inside every cadet had shifted. A seed had been planted. The idea that love, loyalty, and bonds could be chosen freely had entered the minds of hundreds. And it would grow. And in the quiet moments, when Lyra and Daniel walked through the academy alone, holding hands, the silence between them carried its own weight. Words were unnecessary. The promise of that first kiss, the courage it required, the defiance it represented, all resonated. They did not need permission. They did not need approval. They had chosen. And that choice, small as it seemed, carried power far greater than any council decree. By evening, the whispers had become undeniable. The academy felt different. The air vibrated with tension, curiosity, and excitement. Change had begun not in laws, not in commands, not in weapons, but in hearts. And somewhere deep down, Lyra realized something she had not dared to hope before. That simple kiss, one she had thought might ruin everything, had instead given her the greatest gift. The knowledge that choice, courage, and love could change the world, even if the world did not yet know it. By Friday evening, the whispers had reached the council. Lyra knew this moment was coming, but no amount of preparation could steady her nerves. The council chambers were vast, gleaming with crystal light. Every surface shimmered, reflecting the seriousness of their presence. Dozens of elders sat in judgment, their forms glowing sharp and precise. To Lyra, it felt like staring into a storm. "You broke tradition," the eldest of the council thundered, his voice echoing like a crystal bell. "You gave your vow to a human. This is unacceptable." Lyra's hands trembled slightly, but she held Daniel's. The warmth of his fingers through hers steadied her, reminded her that she had not acted alone. She drew in a deep breath and stepped forward. I cannot take it back," she said, her voice quivering but firm. "It was my choice. I chose him." The chamber erupted. Some elders leaned forward, their eyes sharp, accusing. Others whispered among themselves, shocked. The words rebellion and disobedience floated through the air like poisonous shards. Daniel stepped forward, even though no one had invited him. His human frame seemed small compared to the imposing figures before him, yet there was something undeniable in the set of his shoulders, in the calm of his gaze. "Where I come from," he said quietly, but with power that carried across the chamber. "Love is not measured by heritage or rank. It is measured by choice. She chose me. I chose her. That should be enough." The chamber went silent. Not even the faint hum of the crystals could be heard. "You dare speak to the council as if you know our ways," an elder hissed. "I may not know your ways," Daniel replied evenly, "but I know what it means to be human, and we do not measure our worth by old rules. We measure it by our hearts, by what we give willingly, not by what is forced upon us." Lyra's chest swelled with pride and fear at the same time. She had expected anger, maybe punishment, but Daniel's courage made her realize that she had never been alone. Even if the council turned against her, even if the galaxy itself condemned her, she had someone who would stand by her, someone who would fight for her choice. The elders' faces hardened. "This is an act of rebellion," one declared. "It cannot go unpunished. Your bond is illegal. You will be stripped of your place, of your honor. Your actions will not be tolerated." Lyra's heart thudded painfully, but she held her ground. "I will not take my kiss back," she said again, louder this time. "I have done nothing wrong. I followed my heart." The chamber trembled with outrage. Crystals rattled as voices rose. Words like traitor, shame, and reckless filled the air. Lyra could see the elders calculating their next move, their minds spinning with the impossible. A human could not truly understand their rules. A human could not stand against them. And yet here was Daniel, refusing to bow, refusing to fear, refusing to step back. Outside the chamber, news of the confrontation had spread. Students paused in their lessons, leaning close to one another, wondering what would happen next. They had heard the story of the kiss, but now they were seeing the consequences unfold, and for some, it sparked a dangerous thought. If humans could challenge the council, then maybe, just maybe, others could too. The council demanded answers, but Lyra's choice had already spoken louder than any explanation could. She had acted freely, and that truth could not be denied. Even in fear, she felt a new strength inside her, a quiet, burning defiance that warmed her heart. Daniel squeezed her hand, and she looked at him. His eyes were steady, unwavering. "No matter what they decide," he whispered, "we face it together." For the first time, Lyra realized that the galaxy might not only notice them, they might begin to follow. The idea that hearts could choose, that loyalty could be given freely rather than dictated, was a dangerous, thrilling thought, and Daniel's simple human courage had sparked it. The council banged their gavel, calling for silence, but the spark had already ignited. Lyra and Daniel turned their gaze toward the future, uncertain, afraid, yet strangely hopeful. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt truly alive, not bound by tradition, not controlled by fear, but guided by the power of choice. It was only Friday evening, yet the first real cracks had begun to appear in the ancient order of the galaxy, and somewhere deep inside, Lyra knew this was just the beginning. By Saturday morning, the academy felt different. The long corridors that once carried only routine footsteps now hummed with a quiet electricity. Students whispered in clusters, their voices low but urgent. The story of Lyra and Daniel's kiss hand. The council's furious reaction had spread across every hall, every classroom, and every dining hall. It started as curiosity. Small groups of cadets stopped to ask each other questions. "Do you think it's true?" one asked. "Can a human really stand against the council?" Another replied, "I don't know, but it's inspiring." And then the questions became thoughts. Thoughts became doubts. Doubts became ideas. And ideas, once they take root, are very hard to ignore. For centuries, the galaxy's younger races had been taught obedience, bonds, promises. Even love were dictated by elders and councils. Choice was a dangerous word, whispered only in secret. But now, humanity had spoken a simple truth. We choose. A reptilian cadet, normally quiet and withdrawn, approached his friends with wide eyes. "If a crystal can choose a human," he whispered, "why can't I choose my partner? Why must the council decide?" Nearby, a floating avian, her feathers ruffling in nervous excitement, added, "And what if love is about more than tradition? What if it's about the heart?" The ideas spread like wildfire. Students began quietly talking to each other, testing the boundaries of what they had been taught. The academy, once a place of strict order, was now buzzing with possibility. A wave of courage was sweeping through its halls. Lyra walked through the corridor, her heart still heavy from the council's anger, but lighter from the change she saw in the eyes of her peers. Many avoided staring directly at her, fear still present. But some paused and looked at her with something else: curiosity, admiration, hope. A few even smiled. Daniel walked beside her, his hand lightly brushing hers. He had said little since the council meeting, but his calm presence gave Lyra strength. She realized how different humans were in their courage. They did not wait for permission. They did not bow to fear. They simply acted. By mid-morning, the whispers had become conversations. Some cadets questioned tradition openly for the first time. Others cautiously tested their freedom, holding hands, speaking their minds, or refusing orders they had once followed without question. The spark Daniel and Lyra had ignited was becoming a small flame, and flames, as they grow, are very hard to extinguish. Even the teachers could sense it. Instructors who had seen centuries of obedience watched their students in surprise and awe. Some feared rebellion, but others quietly allowed discussions to continue. Sensing that something important was unfolding, Lyra noticed a group of students, species from across the galaxy, talking animatedly about bonds and loyalty. She did not understand all the words, but the passion was clear. Something had shifted inside them. A quiet defiance was spreading, and it was contagious. Later in the dining hall, the whispers turned into open debates. Cadets argued passionately, sharing their opinions and ideas. "We don't need the council to decide our bonds," one shouted. "Why should love follow their rules?" Another replied. Students who had been silent for years were suddenly speaking, their voices strong and clear. And all the while, Lyra and Daniel moved through the academy like a quiet center of a storm. They did not start these conversations. They had only lived their truth, but their courage gave others permission to question, to think, to hope. By evening, the academy was alive in a way it had never been. Old orders felt fragile, long-standing. Traditions began to crack. Students from every corner of the galaxy were daring to imagine something new, a future where choice mattered more than law, where loyalty came from the heart, not fear, and where love could be given freely. Lyra's heart swelled with something she had never felt before. Pride. Not pride in herself, but pride in humanity, in Daniel, and in the ripple they had started. A small kiss, a simple act, had become the first spark in a sea of change. She looked at Daniel and whispered, I think this is only the beginning." He smiled, eyes calm and full of warmth. "Yes," he said softly, "and it's just the start of what humans can do." For the first time, Lyra realized that the galaxy might never be the same. A single choice, a single act of courage, had awakened something larger than them, something powerful, something that could not be ignored, and so, the spark grew quietly, but insistently, lighting the path toward a new era, one where freedom, choice, and the courage of humanity could change everything. By Saturday afternoon, the academy was no longer calm. The once orderly halls now hummed with restless energy. Students gathered in small groups, then in larger clusters, their voices rising as curiosity turned into debate, and debate into action. The story of Lyra and Daniel, their kiss, their courage, and the council's fury had ignited something far greater than anyone had anticipated. In the central hall, cadets from different species stood facing one another, eyes wide and hearts racing. "If they can defy the council," a young reptilian cadet said, "then why can't we?" His words spread like wildfire. Others nodded, their own long-suppressed doubts surfacing. For centuries, tradition had dictated every bond, every vow, every choice. Now, the idea that a bond could be chosen freely was infectious. A small group of avian cadets flitted nervously in the air, their feathers bristling. "We've been told obedience is the only way," one said. "But, if a human and a crystal can choose each other, then maybe we can too." Their whispers grew bolder until they joined in the larger discussions, arguing for the freedom to decide for themselves. Lyra and Daniel moved carefully through the crowd, hand in hand. The warmth of his grasp reminded her that she was not alone, that the act she feared might ruin her life had instead become a beacon of hope. Some students stared, eyes filled with awe. Others avoided her gaze, afraid of consequences. But all of them were listening, thinking, questioning. The council, sensing the unrest, attempted to impose order. Commands were shouted. Guards were deployed. Warnings were given. But the spark had already grown into a fire, and fire does not easily die. Students stood firm, voices rising in defiance, refusing to bow to fear. Daniel whispered to Lyra, "They can threaten, they can punish, but they cannot take away what is freely given." His voice was calm, certain. Lyra felt a surge of courage from his words, a courage she had never known she possessed. The debates spilled into every part of the academic classrooms, dining halls, training rooms. Species that had never questioned authority now argued passionately for choice and freedom. "Why should the council decide who I love?" a young insectoid shouted. "Why should tradition control my heart?" Others shouted back, supporting the sentiment, forming a chorus of rebellion. Even some of the older cadets, who had long accepted the rules without question, began to feel the pull of change. They had seen the courage of a human and a crystal, standing together against centuries of control, and suddenly, they too wanted to make their own choices, to decide for themselves. By late afternoon, the riot of hearts had become undeniable. The academy's central hall, normally a place of quiet order, now thrummed with energy, excitement, and fear. Some students cried out in joy, others in frustration. Some laughed, some shouted, some stood in stunned silence. Every emotion, raw and powerful, filled the space. Lyra looked around, feeling a strange mix of fear and pride. She had started this unintentionally, with a simple kiss, and now She could see the impact. It was beyond her, bigger than anyone could have imagined. She realized that courage could spread, that a single act of honesty and love could inspire hundreds, even thousands. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Look at them," he said softly. "Do you see what we started?" She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I never thought it could be like this," she whispered. "I just wanted to be honest with you." He smiled, eyes full of warmth. "And because you were honest, hearts are waking up. The galaxy will never be the same." By evening, the council could no longer ignore the storm. Their authority had been challenged, not by weapons or strategy, but by something far more dangerous: freedom of choice, inspired by the courage of 2 cadets. And as the sun set over the academy, the halls echoed with voices united in hope, courage, and determination. Riot of hearts that promised a new era. Lyra and Daniel stood together in the center of it all, hand in hand, witnessing the change they had sparked. A small kiss on Thursday had started a movement by Saturday, and no one could predict how far it would go. One thing was certain: humanity's courage, simple and pure, had lit a fire that no council, no law, and no tradition could ever fully extinguish. Saturday afternoon turned into evening, and the energy in the academy had shifted completely. What had begun as whispers and small debates now surged into open defiance. Cadets from every species gathered in the main hall, their voices rising together in a chorus of courage. The ripple that Lyra and Daniel had started had grown into a wave. Daniel and Lyra stood near the center, watching in awe. Humans had never been the largest or strongest species in the galaxy, but their courage was unmistakable. Daniel's calm, steady presence reminded everyone that defiance did not need weapons or armies. It only needed a heart willing to stand for truth. The council had sent messengers and guards to stop the chaos, but the students were unmoved. Human cadets stepped forward first, standing tall, eyes bright with determination. "We will not obey orders that take away our choice," one human declared. "We choose our bonds, our friendships, and our love. No law can take that from us." The word spread instantly. Other species began to step forward, their fear melting into hope. A young crystalline cadet raised her voice. "If they can choose, why can't we?" Choice is not weakness, it is strength. Reptilian, avian, insectoid students of every kind found courage in the simple truth that love, loyalty, and freedom were not crimes. Lyra's heart raced. She had not imagined that their act, just a kiss, could inspire so many. The hall pulsed with energy, voices rising louder and louder, echoing off the crystal walls. She squeezed Daniel's hand. "It's incredible," she whispered. "They're listening. They understand." Daniel nodded, eyes scanning the crowd. "They don't just understand. They're choosing to be brave. That's what humans do. We stand even when we are small. We act even when the world says no." The council watched from above, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. They had expected fear and obedience, not this overwhelming surge of freedom. Their authority, built over centuries, was being challenged not with violence, but with courage, honesty, and the simple power of choice. Students began to chant. The words were not loud with anger, but with conviction. Choice, choice, choice. The chant grew until the entire academy seemed to vibrate with it. The elders tried to shout over them, tried to restore control, but it was impossible. Humanity's defiance had awakened something far bigger than a single council chamber. It had awakened hearts. Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes. She looked around and saw students holding hands with those they had never spoken to before, laughing despite fear, speaking freely after lifetimes of silence. Entire species, long bound by tradition, were daring to imagine a new way of life. The impossible had become possible. Daniel bent slightly, speaking to Lyra in a quiet, steady voice. "It's not just about us," he said. This is what humans bring. Courage, hope, the belief that we can make things better, and it spreads. She nodded, understanding finally what he meant. Humanity had always seemed fragile to other species, young and untested. But that fragility hid a spark of fire that burned quietly, steadily, until it could ignite the hearts of everyone around them. By nightfall, the academy had transformed. The corridors that once echoed with strict orders now rang with laughter, conversation, and debate. Students no longer moved cautiously, they moved with purpose. The impossible rules of tradition felt smaller, weaker, as the power of choice became undeniable. And in the middle of it all, Lyra and Daniel stood hand in hand, symbols of something far larger than themselves. A kiss, once small and private, had sparked courage that no council, no law, no ancient code could suppress. The fire of humanity's defiance had spread, lighting the hearts of the young, the hopeful, and the brave. For the first time, Lyra understood that change did not always come from strength, or weapons, or fear. Sometimes it came from a single act of honesty, a single human heart willing to stand for truth. And in that moment, she knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. By Saturday night, the academy had transformed completely. The once orderly halls, filled with the quiet rhythm of routine, now pulsed with life, laughter, and the sound of debate. Students of every species moved through the corridors with newfound confidence. Something had shifted. Something deep and irreversible at the center of it all. Lyra and Daniel stood hand in hand, watching the change they had sparked. What began as a simple kiss on Thursday had grown into something far greater than either of them had imagined. The ripple of choice, courage, and humanity had spread faster than anyone could have predicted. The council, still reeling from the events of the day, had tried to regain control. Elders banged gavel after gavel, sending guards to restore order, issuing proclamations of punishment. But their authority had been undermined, not by weapons, not by fear, but by the courage of countless cadets who refused to bow. Daniel squeezed Lyra's hand gently. "It's incredible," he whispered. "They won't be silenced. Not anymore." Lyra nodded, her crystalline form glowing softly in the hall's light. "It's more than I ever imagined," she said. They've all begun to believe, to choose for themselves." In every corner of the academy, cadets were speaking their minds for the first time. Bonds were being formed freely, friendships chosen willingly, and acts of kindness and trust spread like wildfire. The older species, once rigid and bound by tradition, were watching in awe, unable to deny the power of this movement. A young reptilian cadet laughed and clasped hands with an avian friend, a bond never permitted before. Across the hall, a group of insectoid cadets lifted their voices together, chanting for freedom, for choice, for the right to decide their own futures. The sound echoed, filling the academy with a sense of hope and energy that was impossible to suppress. Lyra looked at Daniel, eyes wide with emotion. "All of this, it started with just a kiss," she said softly. "Just a moment, and now look at them." Daniel smiled. It was more than a kiss. It was humanity, courage, the belief that what is right is worth standing for, that something no law or council can erase. Even the council could not ignore the shift. Their voices, once absolute, were now drowned in the sound of the students' determination. Some elders whispered among themselves, realizing that control, built over centuries, was crumbling. Not because of anger, but because hearts were awakening. The change was not instant, and it would not be easy. There would be debates, arguments, and consequences in the days to come. But the academy had already been altered in its most fundamental way. Freedom of choice, the courage to love and bond as one wished, had been given life by a human heart willing to stand. Lyra's heart swelled. She felt pride, not just for herself, not just for Daniel, but for humanity, for what humans could do when they chose to act, to protect, and to inspire. They were small, yes, fragile in appearance, but inside burned a fire that could awaken the hearts of countless others. As the night deepened, cadets gathered in smaller groups, sharing their experiences, their hopes, their dreams. The academy had become alive with possibility. No longer would tradition bind them. No longer would fear decide their bonds. Choice, courage, and love had taken root. Lyra and Daniel stood together, hand in hand, silent witnesses to the dawn of a new era. A single human heart, a single act of honesty and courage, had reminded the galaxy that the strongest power was not weapons, authority, or ancient lut, was the ability to choose, freely and boldly, what mattered most. Daniel leaned close to Lyra, his voice quiet, but full of certainty. "This is just the beginning," he said. Lyra nodded, eyes shining. "Yes," she whispered, "and nothing will ever be the same again." The academy was changed forever. The galaxy had begun to change, and it all started with something small, something simple, something human, a kiss, a choice, a heart brave enough to act. For the first time in centuries, the universe seemed a little freer, a little brighter, and a little more alive. Humanity had shown the galaxy that courage, love, and choice could change everything, and that spark would never fade.